10:22 is the time. Need to know what Jeff Angelo is the program. Let's take you back to September. It was announced that the Biden administration, railroad unions, and rail companies had reached an agreement to avoid a railroad strike. Now, here's what's critical to this. This was an agreement between the leaders of the unions. Fast forward to this week, a second labor union has voted against ratifying the tentative agreement. Does that make a railroad strike inevitable? Andrew Donaldson has worked in transportation and logistics, both in the U.S. military and the private sector for over 15 years. Andrew is back on my Newsmaker line. Andrew, thanks very much for joining me again. Welcome back to Iowa Radio.
Great to be back with you. Always happy to be in Iowa, even if it's only on the radio.
Only on the radio, but I tell you what, man, this is such a critical issue to Iowans, the country as far as supply chain, particularly the ag industry in Iowa, Andrew. I mean, what are you thinking at this point? Are we going to see a railroad strike?
It's getting more and more likely, although what's really ironic here is nobody actually wants one, because this is going to be bad for everybody involved, including the railroad workers. They don't really want to do it either. SMART, the largest union, came out and said their strike fund would only last about 4 days if this goes to a strike. And the earliest they can strike, by the way, December 22nd by law. So that would be right before Christmas. You can imagine the chaos that would cause for the workers. Nobody really wants this, but nobody seems to be able to get through the deadlock. This is complicated. You got 12 unions. Only one of them, we got 2 that are disagreeing right now. SMART, the largest one's not even going to vote on this until the 17th. Only one of them's got to disagree because the others aren't going to cross the picket lines. You got political considerations. You got economic considerations. Normally, Congress could step in and legislate binding arbitration, but we have a divided Congress going into a lame duck, so who knows if that happens. This is a big hot mess.
Yeah, it really is, Andrew. Can you outline for me again what the issues are here?
Absolutely. So basically this is over the usual stuff. There's a pay increase in here. There's benefits in here. The sticking point for all of this, and the railway workers have a point here. Sometimes unions overreach. We've seen this. I think they got a fair beef here. They don't get any sick time. Now, they get time off, but that's federally protected sick time is different because sick time is not subject to the carriers or the railway companies scheduling, whereas time off, they can say, well, for the benefit of the company, you can't have this day off. That's the big sticking point. And these schedules are really hard to do because this is a lot of travel. These are very long-hour workers. It's hard to schedule these employees anyway, so you see why the company wants to keep control of this. However, 75% of all workers in America have some kind of sick leave. That dam was going to break at some point, and they've been negotiating this for over 3 years, Jeff. That's the important thing to remember here. This has been going on for 3 years, and that's the main sticking point going on here.
Wow. And Andrew, I'm still trying to get over in your first answer saying it's quite possible they would go on strike December 22nd. Can you give me an idea of what the ramifications of all of that would be?
Yeah, so believe it or not, strikes are actually legally controlled when they can do it, when they can't do it. Otherwise, you have a wildcat strike that doesn't have legal protections. So part of the reason Biden and them wanted that agreement in September is they knew with the cooling off period, and remember, those are the union heads. They still got to go back to all 12 unions and ratify and vote on it individually, which is what's happening now. They knew that would kick it past the election. The problem with kicking it past the election was all the stuff for Christmas is in transportation right now. Rail freight is 30% of all the freight in America, and the ramifications touch almost all the freight in America.
Right.
So they didn't want Christmas getting interrupted. The problem now is the second thing after Christmas. What happens right after Christmas? Well, we have another economic boom in January. People return things, those sorts of things, Cyber Monday, all that kind of stuff. So if you have this strike right before Christmas, legally that's the earliest they're going to be able to do it because there's cool-down periods. There's things, if Congress doesn't act and the union heads can't get together, there'd be a 35-day shutdown starting on December the 22nd. Nobody wants that, but if nobody can figure out a better idea, that's what's looming.
That's just so amazing, Andrew. Okay, so you made an important political point. With a divided government, you weren't going to get Congress to step in. I totally agree with you. Lame duck Congress won't step in. But let's just say we come back and the Republicans control both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and they have the votes. What can they do?
Short term, not a lot. And let's back up, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but folks need to know the mediation board is appointed.
Okay.
And the mediation board started a lot of this mess back in the summer because they kind of gave the unions, because these are, of course, Democratic appointees because we have Democratic administration, they got a little too cozy and gave labor an unfair head up on these negotiations, and that kind of mucked up the work. So that's an important piece to mention here. I don't know what they could do. There's people that normally would handle this, like Senator Richard Burr, who's the head of the Labor Committee in the Senate. He'd normally be one of the, cooler heads, adults in the room, but he's leaving office, so it's hard to tell whether he has any stroke and or interest in digging into this. Marty Walsh is the labor secretary. He negotiated that deal in September. He's actually pretty good on this stuff. He has deep ties in the labor. He should be somebody that can do this. But again, once you switch Congress, and this Congress isn't really going to be focused on this initially because they've got their own agenda, they may get this dropped in their lap. And people, the leadership like Kevin McCarthy, they better deal with it really, really quick because this could have some massive ramifications. And they're going to get the blame for it, even though they got handed a grenade with the pin pulled, because they're going to be in charge.
Right. They're going to be in charge, Andrew. And here's what's fascinating to me. I feel like a state like Iowa knows the implications of all of this and knows it's a big deal. I'm not sure every legislator or every voter knows that this is a big deal, but it will be impossible to ignore if it happens, right? Then we're at the crisis point.
Absolutely. I was in Denver last week for a wedding, and I got stopped at a railroad crossing, and I just sat there for, I grew up around coal trains in West Virginia. Y'all have the ag trains out in Iowa.
Yeah.
Just container after container after container for about 15 minutes, just watching all that freight go by. And it hit my mind. It's like, that's one train. That's, over a mile long of just double-stacked containers. Now, imagine the entire rail network shut down. By the way, the freight has priority, so that would mean passenger rail also shuts down. Remember the port backup? This will back the ports up all over again. We remember how that worked. This has ripple effects that would go for not a week or two, not for a quarter or two. This could go for a very long time recovering. Even like a 35-day shutdown, it would probably take you months to recover from that.
Well, you're hearing why Andrew Donaldson's one of my go-to guys on all of this. Worked in transportation and logistics in the U.S. military and private sector for over 15 years. Andrew, I got a feeling, my friend, we will be talking about this again, maybe right around December 22nd. Thanks very much for chatting with me on what is a really, really important topic. Love the story that he ended the conversation with. I don't feel like a lot of the nation is clued into this as much as you and I are in Iowa, knowing the importance of rail transportation. But here he is sitting, watching a train go by with all that stuff going, what if that stopped? What if that stopped right around the beginning of next year? Just amazing.